Hi, welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, Talk Wildlife. I'm your host, Flo, and I'm here with my co-host, Kevin Newell, who runs his wildlife business, Humane Wildlife Solutions.
Hey!
Our first episode today is going to be about a topic which I plan to have us do in many parts in between other episodes, and it's going to be on the topic of pests and culling with a particular purpose. And that purpose is going to be the attempt to find any British wildlife species which are not pests. And by that, I mean any species which is not deemed a pest by anyone. Because I believe, along with Kevin, that the majority, if not all species of British wildlife, is seen by somebody as a pest. So why is this important? Well, for starters, we've both seen numerous times throughout our lives the following words said: "They're pests, they should be killed." Whether that's said by a gamekeeper, someone who keeps chickens, or just someone with a house or a garden which they're seeing certain species in. Now, the reason this strikes me as important is that labelling a species as a pest for many people seems to be the excuse needed to kill that species. And yet many people who hate one species are fond of others which should be branded as pests by someone else. So does that mean that in that person's eyes, the culling of another so-called pest species is okay, just because of this pest label? If pest is a term that allows a species to be culled, then what species are safe, and why are so many species not? Do humans get to kill other species just because they inconvenience them? And if that isn't okay, then at what point is it? When it endangers people? When it causes economic damage? Or is protecting the non-human natural world always more important than protecting human life at any cost? These are things we'll be discussing over some of our coming episodes. Today, however, we'll be starting by discussing 4 species, or should I just say animals, because we won't be talking in terms of particular species. The first animal, for example, I'll be talking about is the bat. And I'll be generalising all UK species of bat simply as the term bat, rather than going into specifics such as long-eared or pipistrelles. The other 3 animals that we'll be discussing in regard to their pest status today will be hares, blackbirds and ravens. So we'll get started.
So Flo, tell us what you found out about bats and how they're perceived as pests.
So bats are actually quite lucky. I was going to say as a species, but I should really say as a group of species. And that's because they're quite heavily protected in the UK. And I should say that this podcast specifically is going to be about animals in the UK. So I've sort of looked, and Kevin as well, I believe, has looked at legislation in the UK itself rather than around the whole world and all the different species of bats around the world. Generally speaking, I'd say they're popular in a sense and unpopular in another. I mean, they're commonly associated with Halloween and horror films, and a lot of people are scared of them, and people think of rabies, and obviously at the moment people will be thinking about coronavirus, and that's probably going to make bats very unpopular. But then on the other kind of side of the coin, you get bat walks, and a lot of people find bats like really cool and interesting, and I think a lot of children like them because they're sort of mysterious and fun to watch. I actually have a really good memory of when I was younger, and in my garden we had a bat roost just above one of the rooms, and we actually watched and counted 288 bats coming out of their roost, and it was definitely 288 because none went back in, they all came out, and it was amazing. And luckily my parents, seemed quite happy about that, so that was awesome. But not everyone likes them, not just because of the reasons I've listed, but also because they can lead to people's houses smelling and discoloration if they have a roost, like for example above a room. And again, like people are scared of them, especially knowing they're living in close quarters with them. A lot of people don't like them. But there is a lot of legislation which protects them, as I said, and there was actually a case in England where people had to abandon a church because bats had moved in and they weren't given permission to rid the bats of the area, which I think is really good because we're always hearing about animals being displaced for humans, and it's quite rare to hear of humans being displaced for bats. So obviously it would have been good for the people who wanted to use the building, but I think it's good to sometimes let the animals win. So obviously being protected is really good for them, but the reason they're protected is actually because they were persecuted so badly in the past, and you can still get licenses which allow you to disturb bat roosts for like reparation, anything that needs done desperately, or which is a public health and safety issue. And I find when it comes to public health and safety, there usually are a lot of loopholes because at the end of the day, humans are going to be seen as the most important species.
Can I add a little bit to this? So regarding bats and the law, if you look at bats.org.uk, the Bat Conservation Trust, they have a little bit a section about bats and the law. And I'll just read it out word from word here. It says, in Britain, all bat species and their roosts are legally protected by both domestic and international legislation. This means, thanks, Bram, this means you may be committing a criminal offence if you deliberately take, injure or kill a wild bat, intentionally or recklessly disturb a bat in its roost, or deliberately disturb a group of bats. 3. Destroy or damage a place used by bats for breeding or resting, in brackets roosts, even if the bat is not occupying the roost at the time. 4. Possesses, advertises, sells, exchange a bat of a species found in the wild in the EU, dead or alive, or any part of a bat. And 5. Intentionally or recklessly obstruct access to a bat roost.
It's good that there's so many sort of like permissions you have to go through. But from experience, I mean, I've certainly heard of people just doing things themselves and not making it publicly known. I mean, if you've got bats roosting in your house and no one else knows you're about to do something to block up their holes or disturb them, you're not really going to get into trouble. So unfortunately, it's easier said than done that they get protection.
Well, we've both personally witnessed cases where developers have been doing building work and bats have been found on site, and the builders have actually brought the bats to the wildlife rescue that we both used to work at, and without them even knowing that them doing the building work or removing the bats is against the law. So I guess there's going to be quite a lot of occasions where people who don't know there's bats in the building are doing work on the building and then disturbing bats. So I don't know if that would come under as being reckless, or, you know, I don't know. So I don't know how the law works around those kind of situations.
I think the thing to take away from it, basically, is that some people like bats, some people don't, just with pretty much any animal. But they definitely are seen as pests, I would say, because, you know, the discoloration and the smells and people being scared of them, and some people being scared that they're going to give them rabies or suck their blood, and things like that. I mean, a lot of people I've heard of will see a bat in their living room and be absolutely terrified they can't go in the room. But then some people feel the same about that with mice in the room, for example. So just to sum up, I would say that to certain people anyway, bats are definitely seen as pests in this country. They might be protected, but there's ways to get rid of them sometimes, and there's definitely a fear factor there. And I definitely know of people who would want to cull them if they were asked. What do you think? Do you think bats are seen as a pest species in this country?
From my professional perspective, yes, because bats are only... They get classified as a pest when you get companies who want to do building work, or people want to do renovations, or people want to do things that they want to do, and then people then kind of think that their desire to whatever action they're trying to achieve is more important than a bat's roost. So yeah, I guess from a professional perspective, you're more likely to find businesses seeing bats as pests rather than people, because 9 times out of 10 I don't think people realise they've got bats on their property, and therefore if they don't know they're there, they've got nothing to come into conflict with them.
Yeah, it's sort of like the difference between legally being seen as a pest, in that there's like an open licence to kill them all year round and that sort of thing, and then being seen as a pest just by the general public. And I guess those two won't always be the same. For example, you can't cull them easily, but a lot of people don't like them, and there's definitely a lot of people who don't like them or are scared of them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, let's do a flip side. So we're talking about how people perceive bats as pests. If you love bats and you haven't already gone over to the Bat Conservation Trust website, go check it out. It is full of really, really cool information. They've even got the noises of all the different species of bats. And if you want to go to it, it's bats.org.uk. Go check it out. Let us know what you think about it, and let them know that we sent you their way.
So, Kev, why don't you tell us what you found out about hares and whether they're perceived as pests or not?
Okay, well, researching this has been a real big surprise. So I know that we, in this country, the UK, have beagle packs, which are organised packs, groups of people with packs of beagles that go and hunt hare in the British countryside, which I've known about for many, many years. But I never thought why they did it. And it's kind of 2 reasons why. So it's the brown hare they hunt, and you're likely to find these packs all over the south of England. Not so many to the north of England and in Scotland. But one, because they may be seen as an agricultural pest for feeding on off the land, even though they don't take much. A hare doesn't take that much food in the context of what a farmer would naturally spoil from his crop anyway. But the main reason they hunt them is because it's a rite of passage for young hunters, and it's really bizarre. So they're seen as a pest and then used as an excuse for young hunters to make their rite of passage into the hunting world, to gain their horn, as they say. Well, the other one, which again I knew just a little bit about, but more recently has become more in the headlines thanks to the actions of one kind, was mountain hares. Now, the mountain hare is a native species to the UK, when the brown hare isn't. That was introduced, I believe, in the Roman times. But the mountain hares, especially in the Scottish Highlands, they get culled. They're seen as a pest, but this is the crazy thing. They're not seen as a pest to farmers, and they're not seen as a pest to members of the public or businesses. They're seen as a pest to grouse moors, because they make claims that they're affecting grouse numbers. So for the grouse industry to get more money, to make more kills, they need to make sure in their minds that the grouse can thrive, so there's more to shoot, right? And the way they do about this is they exterminate all the wildlife that's on the moors, everything from raptors to all other mammals that might compete or predate on these mountain hares, on these grouse. And then because of that, they don't want any competition for the grouse, so they cull everything else. And mountain hares are then culled for this reason and seen as a pest, because it may affect their profits.
So what is it that the mountain hares actually do that the shooting estates don't like?
Well, I had a look into this, and the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, they say the hares thrive in grouse moors. Hares, and this is what they say. They say hares can sustain high levels of tick and tick-borne looping ill virus, which bring them into apparent conflict with red grouse. So it's because they believe the hare bring these ticks, that these ticks then affect the grouse and the grouse numbers, and therefore that's a problem for the grouse shooting estates. So under those pretenses, they then need to, in their minds, and I think this is totally wrong, in their minds they then need to kill these hares because they see them as a pest, because it's affecting their profits. So it's, I don't even think it's a proven science, to be honest, that actually happens. But like every other species on the moorlands, they're usually persecuted if they, in one way or another, interfere with the grouse shooting estates' productivity of these red grouse. But the unique thing about this, though, which ties into the economy, is these shooting estates have found a way to commercialise hunting hare. So they get people to pay to go up on the moors in big groups and kill thousands of hare. It's absolutely crazy. It's a commercial business now for the shooting estates in their own right. So they're never going to want to stop doing it, because they've found a way to make money out of killing hare on shooting estates. If you look at some of the data got from Freedom of Information requests, in a 1 year period in 2006-2007 shooting season in Scotland, 24,529 mountain hare were culled. That is just absolutely shocking. And if you keep reading through the figures, the new figures showed that total numbers fluctuate around an average of 25,000, reaching as many as, in some cases, 37,000 hares were killed in 2014. I believe this may have been submitted by One Kind. So they're an animal welfare charity in Scotland, one of the largest in Scotland. Fantastic organisation. But if you look at some of the other examples that I think they've come across, in the Lammermoor Hills in 2014, the RSPB Scotland received evidence, and this is from the RSPB Scotland, received evidence that 1,500 to 1,700 mountain hare was shot by landowners across the Lammermoor Hills in spring alone. In Balmoral in 2016, 2 culls involving Balmoral enabling estates were witnessed, one of which is said to kill 500 hares in that one one day. And there's just report after report after report. So, although these hares are deemed by the shooting industry as a pest because they claim from their own science, which you can't really do your own science and publish that as fact unless you get independent peer reviews into what's going on, and then using your own evidence that you gather, which is all biased, let's face it, to then say a species is a pest, to then charge people to come and shoot them and get the money from it. So they're not only making money from killing grouse, they're making money by falsely claiming, well, I say falsely, I don't have evidence to prove otherwise, but they then use their own evidence to say these hares need to be killed, then make money off the back of that as well. So it's shocking, really, that, tens of thousands of mountain hares die in Scotland. This is a native species because man choose to shoot a species which, again, they shouldn't. There's no need for grouse moors, and there's so much more you can touch on the grouse moors and what goes on up there. It's not just the hares which are deemed pests, and it's not just the hares which are culled in large numbers.
So to finish up on the hare topic, would you say, therefore, from your research, that hares are seen as pests?
Yes, because if they wasn't seen as a pest, they wouldn't be killed. So if it's the brown hare on the lowlands, which are hunted by beagle packs and harrier packs, to the mountain hares on the uplands and the moorlands and the grouse estates, which are shot in their tens of thousands, I think both for those two different species and the way they're treated, how can it point to anything other than that these hares are seen as pests? And that's sad to say that, but it's true. Okay, so the next one we're going to cover, Flo's got a very interesting one, and you'll probably listen to this and think, what, seriously? But Flo, tell us what you found out about the good old blackbird.
Yeah, I didn't get tons for this. I just sort of got enough to prove my point, if prove is an okay word to use here. So, surprisingly, in 2018, conservationists in Wales allowed the culling of blackbirds for the preservation of public health and safety. I couldn't find specifically what this was about, but I believe it was probably to do with droppings, as was the case with starlings, which I also looked into, which quite surprised me because I didn't think of this as being an issue. I just didn't assume that anyone would really cull blackbirds. And while blackbirds are listed as green on the endangered species list, 2,000 red and amber listed birds were licensed to be killed by Natural Resources Wales in under 2 years. I also looked at sort of general public perceptions. For example, I looked at some gardening websites where I found people calling them pests because they ate their berries. For example, they would eat whole ones, or they would just peck at loads of them on someone's bush so they couldn't pick them. They would also pull up pot plants, young pot plants. And, obviously there's nothing wrong with saying, oh, that blackbird picked up my pot plant, or ruined my pot plant, or picked my berries. But it was quite shocking to me how quickly people would say, oh, we should cull them, or I wish someone would cull them, as a sort of response to that sort of problem. You get a lot in gardens with insects. People want to kill certain insects in their gardens, or they want to kill slugs because they eat leaves of plants and things like that. But I didn't expect to see it so much with birds. I think because people see birds and insects very differently, but I was surprised to see that people wanted to kill birds for similar reasons. I think we need to modify our behaviour rather than just respond to all of our problems with kill it, because it's so easy just to say kill it, because it doesn't really have a large effect on us. If a pest controller comes to our garden and legally kills an animal, when the pest controller is gone, as long as we don't morally mind, it doesn't have a large effect on us until the same species of animal comes back, like foxes return to a garden, for example. But it's just so easy for us to make that decision, and I think that's quite sad. Yeah, I was quite surprised to find out that blackbirds are seen as pests. Were you surprised to hear that?
Yeah, I mean, who would ever have thought a blackbird would be a pest? I mean, lots of people enjoy watching them. Lots of people have them in their gardens. You just wouldn't imagine that the species people would label a pest.
It was quite interesting, not in a good way, but when I googled it next to the word pest, I just assumed that nothing relevant would come up. And then suddenly I got links to all these websites and about the cull in 2018, and it was quite a surprise.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those birds that you think no one would really mind about, but clearly, when you're talking about pests, I think that any animal that people don't like for whatever reason, how minor or major, that affects their, their property or things they want to do, they're going to label it a pest so they can do something about it, I guess.
I guess it makes sense. If they eat people's berries, then people are going to see them doing that. Even if they literally see one blackbird eat one berry once, they're then going to assume that that's a problem to them and see the animals as pests.
But there's so many ways to get around things like that. If birds are going for your crop that you're growing, be it berries or other fruits and vegetables, you just need to take simple actions to stop that happening. It's not hard. People do it all the time, and there's no shortage of devices or ways to be able to stop birds taking your berries or whatever that they're taking from your garden.
I suppose if the question today is whether they're seen as pests or not, no matter how humanely we treat them, it doesn't change the fact that they are still seen as pests.
Yeah.
So, our last animal of this episode is ravens. So, Kev, why don't you tell us what you found out about ravens and their pest status?
Well, this is a very complex and deep lot of research I had to do to actually understand this problem. Now, the reason why they're seen as pests, because there's claims by the farming community that ravens kill their lambs and also kill their sheep. But is there any real evidence that this is happening? That's still a big question at the moment. There's a lot of research going into it, because obviously because people are saying they are pests, they're then caused to cull these birds. And it's really weird, because reasons for wanting the culls and calling ravens pests is that they claim they predate on lambs, and this is claimed by the farming sectors. And to add justification to this, they claim raven populations are really healthy right now from the last 20 years of data, that it's okay to cull them still. And then you have like the NSA, which is National Sheep Association. They claim that ravens are endangering ground nesting birds. The trouble with the reports is that that the National Sheep Association and a few farmers are referring to is that none can be really verified. So as you start to read these different reports, none of them are actually independent peer-reviewed studies. They're almost just like gathered data from farmers.
Hearsay.
And yeah, they've basically just done a questionnaire and gone, yes, this many farmers say that ravens are killing them. But the really interesting thing about that is the Scottish Government did an in-depth study and report into the loss of sheep. And it covered two sections, due to dog attacks and due to wildlife attacks. And it's surprising just how many cases of sheep losses are not witnessed by anyone. I think it's about 6% of claimed wildlife attacks on sheep are ever seen. Yet they're claiming there's still a lot of these, because they'll go along and they'll find a dead lamb and there'll be a raven nearby. They'll blame that on the raven, or they'll blame that on the fox, or even blame it on the badger. So the evidence and the data they're given is not really scientific.
Circumstantial.
Yeah, exactly. So the evidence they're given to say the ravens are killing the lambs and the sheep is not really backed up by any solid science. It's just there's a raven in a field where a lamb has died, we'll blame the raven. Or the raven's feeding off the carcass of a lamb that could have died due to not being seen early enough, or complications in the birth from the ewe. The claims by those who will call ravens pests, or they are having an effect on ground nesting birds, especially the part about the ground nesting birds, is simply not true to the extent that claims of scientific research studied by Amar, Redpath, Sim and Buchanan, called Spatial and Temporal Associations between recovering populations of common raven and British upland wader populations, and another study by Weston and Duffy's called Numbers and Breeding Successes of Golden Plover and Dunlin in Areas Frequented by Ravens, state there is little substantive evidence to justify the control of raven populations for the large-scale conservation benefit of breeding wader populations. And a different study was also done by the Scottish Government, also backs this up. So they may call them pests, but the claims they are making, that's not all that truthful. So I believe they make their evidence and say that they are pests when at most I think they're scavengers. The claims they use to classify ravens as pests are not proven, whilst the scientific evidence states otherwise to their claims. But to stick to the original question, are ravens seen as pests? Yes, they are. Do I think they are? No.
So, you just finished talking about ravens, which is the last animal we'll be talking about today in regards to their pest status. And I thought before we finish this episode, especially as it's the first of our pest episodes, we should really actually mention what a pest is. And obviously everyone listening will know what a pest is in general terms, but it's always good to get an actual definition. So I've just found out the Oxford definition in the Oxford Dictionary. And pest comes up as an insect or animal that destroys plants, food, etc. Or an annoying person or thing. So if it affects food, that seems to be the sort of most obvious way in which an animal can be a pest. Or if it annoys someone, which every single animal out there, even dogs and cats, will be a pest to someone if that's the case. But talking about British wildlife, even from that alone, there's no chance that anything isn't a pest. But I think we'll stick it along the lines of, are they officially seen as pests? And by that I mean, not did someone once write, oh, I found that bird or that mammal annoying, but more they cause them a specific problem, like they steal my food or they foul in my garden or they're damaging something of mine. So I think we'll stick it more to that, because if we're literally just saying, does it annoy someone, we could literally just list every single species in the whole planet and just say, it probably will, it does. So I think if you're okay with that, I'll just stick with a sort of definition where a person has specifically complained about something they've done.
I think that's the best way to go forward, because like you said, anyone can take a dislike for any reason that a bird, like a blackbird or a worm in their garden which is on their nice clean path, is making them to complain, and they could then foresee that as a pest. But if we look at it in terms of people complaining about an animal because it's affecting livelihood or their business, or bringing a real conflict around rather than just an opinion, is the best way to look at it as a pest.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think we could go down the road of just listing whether a certain species has ever annoyed anyone, but I think that would take away any chance of discussion we'd have, so I think we'll keep it at that. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed our first episode. I'm sure, or at least I hope, that over the weeks, months, and all the future episodes we do, we just get better, because being our first episode, I'm sure we'll improve upon it. If anyone's got any ideas of things you want us to cover, or just any comments in general, then feel free to get in touch. We're hoping to discuss all sorts of things, obviously not just the pest species debate, but that's just where we thought we'd start, because I've been interested in that sort of idea for years really, and obviously Kevin's business being all about so-called pest control, he's interested in that as well, so we thought it'd be a good starting point. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you'll tune in again to listen soon. Bye!